because all those incredible things you do, you're so busy stressing at the time and trying to do it. Sometimes it's hard to step back and go, wow, what we're doing is really cool here. And this is, so I think it's to try and enjoy it along the way.
Today's show is sponsored by Enigma Elements. As filmmakers, we're always looking for ways to level up production value of our projects and speed up our workflow. This is why I created Enigma Elements, your one-stop shop for film grains, color grading LUTs, vintage analog textures like VHS and CRT images, smoke, fog textures, DaVinci Resolve presets, and much more. After working as an editor, colorist, post, and VFX supervisor for almost 30 years, I know what film creatives need to level up their projects. Check out enigmaelements.com and use the coupon code IFH10 to get 10% off your order. I'll be adding new elements all the time. Again, that's Enigma, ENIGMA, elements.com. I'd like to welcome to the show Simon West. How you doing, Simon?
Very well. How are you?
I'm doing great, my friend. Thank you so much for coming on the show. As I was telling you earlier, I've been a huge fan of your work from the beginning of your feature world. And I actually seen some of your music videos and commercials as well growing up. But there's very few action directors who do action like you do. So I'm excited to get into the weeds of your journey and of your process. So first question, my friend, I have to ask you is, why in God's green earth did you want to get into this insanity that is called the film industry?
Well, I never really had any other idea of anything else I wanted to do. And, from about 12 years old, it was quite serious. But I have to say, I was really fascinated by film from like 3 or 4 years old because my dad had an old Super 8 camera and projector. And it's one of my earliest memories of him putting the screen up in our kitchen and projecting, home movies, and just the fascination of seeing the moving image on this screen in a dark room, with the dust melting on the bulb and the smell of it and the smell of the screen. And I still have that screen. And every time I open it, it's the same old smell. It takes me back to like being, 4 years old and seeing the home movies. And so it stuck with me. So when I hit 12 and I was sort of, could do something about it, I got, a paper round and saved up my money and bought a little Super 8 film camera. And then it was all about saving up money for the film stock. Because in those days, one roll of film that was 2.5 minutes long cost about the same as 2 music albums. So it was really expensive. So I never had a music collection growing up because all my friends, would have albums and collect vinyl. And I never did because every penny I saved went on movie film, to make my little films. And so I still don't really have a music collection. I mean, I've just about started to do, Spotify playlists and everything, but I've never owned physically a music collection. And I guess nobody does now. Everything is virtual. So, but yeah, so it was one of my earliest memories. It's the only thing I ever wanted to do. I sort of started earnestly making stuff at 12. And then when I got to 16, I heard about a film club in the next city to me, which was Oxford. And they had 16 millimeter film equipment. And they were mostly, graduates or postgraduates. And, I went along as this sort of gawky 16-year-old kid, and they taught me to use the 16 mil equipment. And so I started just shooting that myself. And I went out on the streets of London and into the, the subway and shot things down there. And I started shooting musicians who just played on the street, who were busking for money. And I sort of combined music and film quite early on in that way. And then I was sort of interested in the musicians, but I was also interested in the way music played with film. And it was always very, evocative to me. So even though I never had a music collection, I always associated, music and film, the imagery together. And I managed at 18 to talk my way into the BBC in their film department. And at that time, there was one film school in England, the National Film School, and it was really hard to get into. You had to be a graduate or postgraduate, or you had to have been a journalist, or you had to have gone on a expedition through the jungle. You had to offer them something quite exceptional to get in. And they only took 25 people a year, which was a tiny amount. So I didn't think there was any chance of getting into that. But luckily, the BBC took there was one guy there, I think, that sort of saw a bit of himself in me. That was this sort of precocious film brat who knew everything about film, or thought they knew everything about film. And I certainly knew a lot technically about how it worked. And, I could talk endlessly about film. And I'd been watching Truffaut films on, my little black and white portable in my bedroom from, 12 years old. So I knew about, different sorts of cinema out there, and American cinema, French cinema, English cinema. And, but I also knew technically how to do it. So they kind of, one of the questions was like, well, we don't usually take people of your age. You have to usually be in your 20s at least to get in, mid-20s. And they said, well, what are you going to do if you don't get in? And I said, well, I'll just apply again. I'll just keep applying until you let me in. So they just obviously didn't want to be stalked or, hassled for the next 10 years. So they let me in and they trained me. So I got this training by the BBC in every department. That was great at that time. They taught you film editing, photography, you knew everything about the lenses, everything about the lighting, how the sound was recorded, how the sound's mixed, everything technically. And then they send you to every department. So I started in documentaries, then I went to drama, and then arts documentaries, and news and current affairs, and they just rotate you around. And then when you find an area that you like, you can, apply to stay there. And I ended up in drama, obviously, because that's what I wanted to do. And I worked with some, great directors under them. But when I was there, it was like Mike Leigh was there at the time making a film, who does very improvised drama. So I kind of, tapped into that and realized how you can work with actors to get so much out of an actor. Wow. Rather than just sitting in your room, bashing out the script yourself. If you actually get a group of actors together, you're going to come up with something really cool. So he taught me a lot of that. And then also there was the traditional BBC dramas, which, Sherlock Holmes or Pride and Prejudice, or, anything to do with Dickens or Emily Bronte, all that sort of costume drama, which is very traditional. And then on the other hand, this sort of improvised drama from Mike Leigh. But also I learned a lot from working in documentaries and current affairs, because documentaries taught me to make a story out of what you actually ended up with, not what you hope to get. Because often you plan a movie or film and it's going to be perfect and you're going to get all these great sequences. But what you actually end up with is sort of, if you're lucky, it's, 50% of what you set out to get. And then you've got to make the best story you can out of what you actually ended up with. And documentaries is like that. You turn up, you shoot whatever happens, and then you look at this pile of stuff and you go, okay, how can we make a story out of this material? So I use that a lot in my filmmaking, that sense of don't stress too much about what you were hoping to get. Just try and make the best of what you did actually get. And some of it's better than you planned, And then the other thing I loved was in current affairs. I mean, I worked on a news program called Newsnight, which is still running, that went out at 11 o'clock at night. And you'd sit around all morning waiting for stories to come in. And then in the afternoon, the story would come in and you'd be editing all afternoon. And then, you'd still be mixing the sound and everything as the show started. So quite often, you were running down the corridor with the film under your arm as the anchor was announcing the film, and they were throwing it on the machine and pressing go, and it just made it. And that taught me not to panic, because again, when you're shooting, things go wrong, and sometimes you're under a huge stress. I've been in situations with gigantic stunts, some pretty famous ones on, in films like Con Air and everything, where I've had 200 stuntmen, a full-size aeroplane, a full-size building that's supposed to collapse, and it's all supposed to happen in one go. I've had 17 cameras running, and something has gone wrong, and you just can't panic, and you can't, crumble, and that sort of broadcast news, as it were, that I worked on taught me how to keep a steady head in the situation like that, and how to get out of it.
So it's fascinating hearing your story. Is that it looks like you went through almost a boot camp very early on, and covered almost every aspect of the tool sets. So you picked up so many tools that you put in your toolbox, your director's toolbox, that by the time you started to actually direct, you'd been doing it in a sense for a long time. These skills, like the broadcast news, which doesn't specifically, translate to cinema, but yes, it does translate to cinema. So you were kind of being groomed, by the universe, if you will, to do the kind of films that you have been doing throughout your career.
Yeah, I was very lucky in that sense that I did end up, and it wasn't just then, it was later when I went through music videos for a little bit, and then commercials particularly, which then gave me another set of skill sets and experience. And it's flying hours. There's that old adage, to be an expert, you have to do something for 10,000 hours. And so if you can arrive on set, with 10, 20, 30, 50,000 hours of flying time, you're going to be in a much better position. I mean, I started in editing, which is particularly lucky because that is definitely a great learning for directors, how to construct the story and what do you actually need and how you can cheat and how you can, give yourself some slack and not have to shoot every single thing you think you need, because, in editing, you can help. And so editing was definitely a great start. And then, when I went, as I said, those various, BBC situations, was that one set of experience. But then when I went into commercials, that's working at a very high level all over the world. So I would be up a mountain, one day, then I'd be underwater the next. I'd be, hanging out of a helicopter or racing cars, and then I sort of moved towards, I guess what it was, I particularly looked, how do I get into feature films? It was like, so I looked for role models. And so in England, all the big directors went through commercials. So it was Ridley Scott, Tony Scott, Hugh Hudson, Adrian Lyne, Alan Parker, all these guys who ended up making films in England and then Hollywood, had gone through commercials. And so I deliberately targeted commercials because it was a very high-end kind of training. And especially in England, they're very kind of big budget, glossy, very well made, often better made than the shows in between them. At that stage, TV was very cheap and cheerful in those days in the UK, but the commercials were very high end. It's caught up now, of course, TV is as good as movies, if not better sometimes. But so I targeted those type of people and that type of thing. So I ended up making a test commercial. I deliberately shot a music video for a band, and I put in a little story in it. So I had to do the typical playing the instruments, and I was never a big music video director. It was really a way of paying the bills while I got into commercials and then into movies. But so I deliberately made this little story in the music video, and then after I'd done that, I took it out and I cut it down into a test commercial. And I had this test commercial which I sort of took with me when I got on the plane to the States. And the company I was working with in London had an LA office, and they said, do you want to try and work out to the LA office? Because there was no work in the UK at that time. It was absolutely dead. So I went over with sort of $400 in my pocket and this fake commercial and started, touting it around, and it sort of started to get interest. And by sheer coincidence, it was sort of comedic. It was a fake comedy beer commercial. And so then I started just getting offered comedy, which was very convenient in a way, because it was the commercials that had actors, dialogue. It wasn't just cars driving through pretty forests and mountains or models on the beach. It was, it was a little story in itself, so I could practice my art. And so I just started doing comedy commercials, and they got bigger and bigger, and then ended up sort of doing Super Bowl commercials for, the Budweisers. So like Budweiser frogs, and then the Pepsi commercials. And they started to get a lot more attention. And, these were, they're big budget. They were spending about as much as an little independent film on these 30-second commercials. So again, I got used to having the big toys, as it were, but it still wasn't a movie. It's still only 30 seconds. It's still not a movie. So I'm still desperate and hungry to get into the, legitimate filmmaking. And of course, with the high profile Super Bowl commercials, I started getting calls from the studios. And so I got a call from Columbia offering me a romantic comedy, because they obviously thought, oh, well, he does comedy, so we'll do that. And then I got a spy thriller from a UK company. And then I got the call from Jerry Bruckheimer, who said, I've seen your commercials, are really impressed, and come in for a meeting, and let's, talk about possibly making a film together. And so, of course, I rushed into that and had the big meeting with Jerry, on the giant desk, and in some ways the rest is history. But it was an awesome meeting, and he basically had a wall of scripts behind him. It was in the days when scripts were printed on paper, and every producer would have a stack of them in their office with the titles written on them. But Jerry didn't have just a pile. He had a wall of them. It's probably a couple of thousand scripts. And he turned around and he pulled 3 off, it looked like it was random, but I'm sure he knew exactly which ones he was pulling off. And he threw them across the desk and said, look, read those this weekend and tell me which one of the one you want to make as a movie. And 2 of them were... they were all action films, basically, because that's what Jerry did. He did those type of films. 2 of them were pretty straightforward, I felt, a bit cliched kind of action movies. But the third one was a film called Con Air. And I read this, and it was quite a small film. It was like a character-driven film, but the characters were so good, and even the names of the characters were cool, like Sally Can't Dance and Cyrus the Virus, and it just hooked me right just for reading that. I would have done it just for the name of the characters, basically. And so I went back, and I turned down the romantic comedy. I turned down the spy thriller, and I said to Jerry, look, out of these 3, I want to make Con Air. And he said, well, it's a very small film, and we need a summer blockbuster. So you've got to go away and turn this small character film, because it was written by Scott Rosenberg, who did, Things to Do in Denver, When You're Dead, and Beautiful Girls, which were fantastic, but very small, beautifully made, character based films. And this was the same thing. And Jerry wanted a summer blockbuster. So I had to go away and sort of invent all these big events and sort of blow them up and make them, larger than life. And just every couple of weeks I'd go in. He said, got to make it bigger, make it bigger. And so I just, had a field day just going in. And so I was like, okay, how can we make this thing even bigger and more ridiculous than it was before? And that's what you ended up with. That's why Con Air looks like that.
No, it's fascinating. Con Air is one of those films that it's just one of those movies that sticks with you for, especially of that generation. When it came out, I saw it in the theater, and it's built a life up on its own over the years. And, there's so many legendary stories I hear. I heard Danny Trejo. I was watching a recent documentary with him, and there was a story of him being on set with Con Air, and there was obviously a lot of testosterone on that set. lot of testosterone, and all the actors are trying to, like, oh, I'm super tough, and I'm super tough, and I'm super tough. And Danny was quiet in the corner. And Nicolas Cage came up to the group, because it was all of them sitting around trying to one up each other on how tough they are and how scary they were in real life. And Nicolas Cage came up and goes, the only one I'm scared of is Danny. And Danny hadn't said a word. And then he's like, what'd I do? He goes, it was that look that he had. Things like that.
Yeah. But I was going to say, ironically, Danny was like the sweetest,
I heard
guy of the whole group to deal with. It was like an inverse proportion. Like the tougher you were, the nicer you were. And it was it was all the guys that had never been near a prison were the ones that were
or a fight, or even a fight for that matter.
Yeah, I mean anything, but you can imagine, there were 400 men in the desert for like 3 months, and I think there were like at that time there was only 2 women on the crew, and so it did go a bit crazy because you get 400 guys in the desert with nothing to do and the sun beating down on you. Everyone did go a little bit apocalypse now.
Now, how do you on a film like that, it's your first big Hollywood production. You're working with Jerry Bruckheimer. This is your dream shot. So I'm assuming there's some pressure on you. Yeah, you've got 50,000 hours. You got 50,000 hours of airtime. There's no question. But you're at the show. This is the show at this point in your career. And if this fails, it's over. It's over.
Absolutely. Well, I had done 50,000 hours, but short hops, between, local flights that were, the longest shoot I'd been doing was, 2 days, 3 days. This was 100-day shoot. And so by day 30, I was, down and out. I'd hit the wall. I was like 30 days because it was a giant production. And, I was naive. I went in thinking, oh, this is completely doable. And it was around day 30 that I just went, I'm not sure if I can make it to the end. But, after a while, you sort of buckle down and it becomes a day job. And you start to think this will never end anyway. I'm just going to do this every day for the rest of my life. It's so long and there's so much work to do that it's a very odd when it finishes because you suddenly takes you by surprise. But yeah, there was a lot of pressure. I didn't realize that. Because I was naive to, Hollywood and films, that the studio has a list of your replacements already drawn up when you start filming. So if in the first 2 weeks you completely screw it up, they already know who they're going to go to replace you with.
Really?
Yeah. I only found that out afterwards, but I would be, I would have felt even more pressure than that. But they protect you from that. So they don't want to, completely crush you. So,
right.
but it was tough getting people to take you seriously with the first film of that size because some crew members I had worked with in commercials, so they knew that I sort of knew what I was doing. But a lot of them, was like, who is this guy they've given this massive film to on the first thing? So a lot of people I did have to, come up against and go, well, this is what's happening, and this is my first film, but you basically have to follow the orders because they've given me this responsibility, and we are doing this. And so, I'd say 50% of people were very supportive, and then 50% were a little tougher.
Really, yeah, and that's something that a lot of directors don't understand when they first get on set. Is that when I remember being the youngest guy on set as a director, and the DP is 20 years older than me, or the grips are 20 years older than me, or the production, and they all have this experience, and they test you, and a lot of them, they just feel like, oh, this kid doesn't deserve this shot, things like that. So I can only imagine at your level, the kind of, this was a lottery ticket. Someone literally Jerry handed you a lottery ticket, and I'm sure you had to deal with it. How do you overcome those egos on set, those kind of barriers when you're working with crew members, maybe even keys, like your DP or like your production designer, or keys who are fighting against your vision as a director? How do you handle that?
Well, luckily, I didn't have that situation because I brought my own DP, my own production designer, and so my core crew were people I knew and trusted and supported me. And it was more the peripherals that were, you'd come up against. But all I could do was do a professional job, and also don't have any ego, because I think that's what gets people's back up, is if they sense that what you're doing or what your decisions are based on ego rather than what's best for the film. Basically, everybody there is a passionate filmmaker and wants the best film possible, and that's why people go into the film business, is because they're really interested in it. And I love the idea when I did a big complicated crane shot, and it took a while to get that. I'd run over to the monitor to see how it went, and I'd look around and there'd be 20 people looking over my shoulder because, the grips wanted to see if they did a good job. The camera focus wanted to see if he did a good job, and everybody, actors came in to see what they had done. So everybody basically wants to do a really good job. So if they sense that you're the same and you're just there to make the best film, then they forget whether you've done 5 films or no films, and it's only if a director brings this ego on set and is trying to demand respect through, position or, and it's just flexing muscles. And usually, it's a cover for insecurity, I think, right. When they're panicking, they don't know what they're doing, and it comes out as ego. And it's the same with difficult actors. Usually I found that actors that are really talented, and luckily, I came in at a very high level, so I'm dealing with people that have won Oscars and or have got 30 years of experience and have done. And these people are very talented and operating at a very high level in their field. And when people are good at something, they're usually very secure in it, and so they're not. They're not difficult. It's usually when someone's very insecure in what they do and think they're faking it, or they think they're not very good, that they end up being a problem, because they're sort of diverting attention from what they think is their failing. So I haven't, had a problem like that with all those big guys, whether it was Nick Cage or John Malkovich or John Cusack, all those guys. I didn't have a problem at all, because they were very good at what they did. And so they were very comfortable in playing in that world. And also we created a really, it was a fun film to make, because, you get to say those great lines, and all these actors, which basically independent film, they were used to doing costume dramas or little indies in motel rooms. And suddenly they're on this giant film set, and Malkovich has got a pump action shotgun in his hand and is shouting, crazy lines. And they're having the time of their life. So why would you be? And also they're being paid 4 times more than they've ever been paid, because, Jerry's got the massive checkbook. So that's how I ended up with such a great cast, is because Jerry just said, just pick all your favorite actors. And when you've got that huge, big brother of him and the studio behind you, no one can say no, really, because it's a really fun, enterprise. It's a great script, and they're being paid handsomely. Everybody is there, for a very good reason. They're having a really good time. So it wasn't as bad as people think. Like suddenly you've got 20 big actors. They're all going to be a complete pain in the arse. Occasionally one person has a bad day or something.
Sure.
Like we all do. But generally speaking, everyone was enjoying it. And, it's the waiting around. To be honest, the work is never the problem.
It's the setup.
It's the waiting.
The setup time.
It's like, that's when people get, do I have to wait another, for this lighting or this set or the stunt to be set up? The actual acting they love to do. So as long as you can, give them enough acting to do, they're happy.
So I have to ask you, there's one scene in Con Air there's many, but there's one that I really have to ask you. This is a stunt. And I think I know it's practical, but I have to ask how the hell you did it, which is the plane dragging the Corvette in the air and smashing into the tower.
Yeah.
That's practical, right?
Yes, mostly, because the thing is that, Con Air, remember when it was made, there was CG around, but it was very expensive. And it was like, it was only Jurassic Park and people like that could afford it, or to make it look good. And I was always a devotee of doing it for real and in front of the camera and seeing it. And so there's almost no CGI in Con Air. It's all done in front of the camera, either full scale, or we did do quite old school miniatures.
Yeah,
which was a lot of fun. So we flew a real plane over Vegas with smoke pouring out the back of it, and there were endless phone calls to the police of people saying there's a plane crashing over Vegas. It flew over and it's smoke pouring out of it. So we did things like that for real. And then we actually did for the hitting the hard rock. That was a massive model, so this beautiful scale model that was probably 30 feet across of this plane into a 30, 50 foot version of the Hard Rock guitar. And we built the whole Vegas Strip in miniature on Van Nuys Airport. So, we had all the buildings with miniature neons, and they're all about, 12 feet high. And we had radio controlled cars going up and down the strip. And then it's
fun.
It was absolute, riot for a kid in a sandbox kind of feel. And then a lot of it's real. We had a plane that actually drove down Vegas Strip. It had a bus in it. They gutted out a real plane, put a bus in it, and they could actually drive it down, Vegas Strip without any wings on it and hit cars and things like that. And then the final one was another plane. We had about 3 real planes, and the final one was the one that crashed into the Sands Hotel, which, it's kind of a well-known story, but Sands was going to be blown up. And, I originally I wanted to hit the casino opposite, the one with the volcano. Mm-hmm. And because it had a big lake, and I wanted to crash the plane into the lake. And then it go underwater. I had a whole underwater sequence worked out, and then it would hit the volcano, and the volcano would explode, and it was all going to happen. And then Steve Wynn, who ran that hotel, showed me around, and I saw how the volcano worked, and I saw how the water pumps work. I saw every aspect of it. We planned it all out. And then he said, just send me the script, and for the final sign off. So I sent him the script, and then I get a call back saying, oh, you can't crash into our, thing. This script is too, we're a family organization. Because at that time, Vegas was trying to portray itself as, as a family resort. And so they didn't, the bunch of criminals crashing into the thing was not what their image wanted to be at that time. So he said, sorry, but, we can't do it. It's bad for our image. So suddenly I had no location. But then I was reading the LA Times on a Sunday, and I saw they were blowing up the Sands Hotel in a few weeks. So called them up at the last minute, said, look, can you delay blowing up the hotel for a couple of weeks while we build a whole set in front of it and put a huge plane on a ram and send it into your casino? And they agreed. So, there was a mad rush to build this rig where a full-size plane was rushed down a ramp into the Sands Hotel. And as we were building it, they were slowly nibbling away at the back of the casino, knocking more and more of it down until it was just, the front part left. And we finally got it done in time. And it was a one-shot deal. That was one of those classic Hollywood. I couldn't shoot it in parts like you would normally do with an action film, because there was one plane and there was one casino. And once that plane was moving, there was nothing going to stop it. So that's when I had the 17 cameras all hidden in bushes and inside the plane and inside the casino. And, the night came and they closed off the strip, and 5,000 people lined up to watch it. And they pressed the button, as the sun was coming up, and this thing went down this 50-ton plane went down the ramp, and the cable that was pulling it snapped at the last minute, and it just stopped on the edge of the ramp, and it was teetering. And if it went over, it would smash itself to bits, and we couldn't, even in those days, buy another airplane, certainly not in that time or anything. But luckily, it just sort of stopped and teetered on the edge and didn't go over. So we had to sort of de-rig all the cameras and come back the next night and set it all up again. And but most of those things were done in camera. That the Corvette hitting the town, everything in that sequence is real, apart from the wide shot of it being dragged through the air, because that was kind of aerodynamically impossible. It would have just hung down and probably,
I was wondering about that.
Probably crashed the plane or something. So that's the only CG shot in the whole thing. Everything else is either real, full size real, or miniatures.
That's insane. That's absolutely insane. So I have to ask you, as directors, there's always that one day on set that the entire world is coming crashing down around us, and we feel like we're never going to make it. It sounds like every day was like that for you on Con Air or in many of your other movies. Is there any days that stood out, a situation where you're like, oh my God, I don't think we're going to make it through this day. And what was that thing and how did you get over it? And it could be on Con Air or any of your films.
Yeah, well, I mean, apart from that one thing there that was I guess there was, it did happen a lot, because we were doing complicated, fiddly stuff that was in camera. We couldn't fix it with CGI or painting out things. It had to work. And I guess there was another incident on Con Air, I guess, which was the fire truck sequence at the end that was supposed to be in Vegas, but I think Vegas was so sick of us by that time because we were moving from street to street and blowing stuff up and crashing. And they said, look, they sort of stopped us giving us permits, basically. And so we had to sort of scuttle back to LA. And I had to sort of do this sequence, this fire truck sequence where you had to hide that it wasn't Vegas. And I couldn't, as I said, now you would just paint a CGI city behind it. So I thought, well, how can I hide that I'm in LA? So I thought, well, we'll do it in a tunnel. So I went to the 3rd or 4th Street tunnel. I can't remember which number it is, but in downtown LA. And of course, there's no tunnel in Vegas at that time, but we fudged that. We say, okay, this is a tunnel. And I said, well, have the fire truck, race through this. And the city said, okay, you can have from 10 p.m. to midnight, because in fact, no, I think it was 5 p.m. till 10 p.m. because of the noise and all that something. And so it basically had 5 hours to shoot this one big stunt, which was basically Diamond Dog on the motorbike getting dragged into standing on the back of the fire truck, and Nick Cage's on a police motorbike, and he rides into the back of the fire truck, jumps on the fire truck, and the motorbike explodes on the back of the fire truck, taking out Ving Rhames as Diamond Dog. And it was all set up, and the idea was that by this time we were sort of down from the usual 17 cameras. I only had 7 cameras for this because we would get to the end of the shoot and you're starting to run out of money, and it's a slightly smaller stunt, but it still was a one-off thing. And it was the fire truck going in the tunnel, the motorbike being dragged into the back of it on a rig, and then the explosion happening. And I had 7 cameras set up. And of course, the cameras get set up, nice and quickly. They're all in position. But the complicated rig to do this, we can't start rigging it till 5 o'clock. And we have to be off the street by 10. So the special effects guys are building the rig. They're putting the cables in. They're putting the explosives in there. They're rigging the bike. They're rigging the fire truck. The stuntmen are practicing, and it's going 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and we've got to be off by 10. Every hour I'm going to the special effects. Are you ready? Are you ready? Oh. And they said nearly ready. And I swear to God, no kidding, 5 to 10. He said and we were supposed to be off at 10. He said, okay, we're ready. And so then all hell breaks loose. So the camera guys are all over by the coffee truck because they've been standing there, for 4.5 hours doing nothing. So they're all eating, donuts and coffee. They're not next to their cameras. And the stunt guy in the fire truck has fallen asleep because he's been sitting in that truck waiting to go for 5 hours. And so the AD, the first assistant director, picks up the radio and says down the radio, because we got 5 minutes to do this, to the radio, to the stunt guy, he shouts down the radio, "Are you ready to go?" And the stunt guy, all he hears is "go." He wakes up, pushes his foot on the accelerator, and heads off down. And this thing is all automatic. So once that fire truck's rolling, it's also dragging the motorbike that is rigged to explode when it hits the back. There's no stopping it once it's going. So I rush over to the monitors and shout to the camera guys, it's rolling, go. So they all start running from dropping their coffee cups everywhere, running to the cameras. And out of the 7 cameras, some of one gets an operator gets there, but no focus puller. Another one gets the operator and a focus puller. Then there's 3 cameras that are rigged on the actual truck and the motorbike that are all rigged to one button. And an assistant runs over, presses that button, and those 3 cameras go. So I go, okay, I've got 3 automatic cameras I can see those running on my monitor. I've got one camera on a crane that's slightly out of focus because there's no camera. There's no focus puller on that one. And I've got another guy that has a operator and a focus. So I've got that's 4 good angles. This is going to be all right. I'm supposed to have 7, but I'll settle for 4. And this thing is racing down the road. And at that moment, the first assistant runs down the road trying to stop the fire truck, going, stop, stop, stop. So the assistant camera on the 3 cameras that were on one button hears the word stop and presses the stop button on the 3 cameras.
Oh,
so I went from 4.5 cameras to now I'm down to 1.5 cameras running. And just as he does that, it happens. The motorbike hits the fire truck. It explodes.
you got one shot.
Boom. I've got one shot and one slightly out of focus shot. And that's what's in the movie. And that's what you have to do. You have to go.
You got to roll. You got to roll with it.
Yeah.
I love hearing stories like this because so many young filmmakers coming up, they just think, it's Hollywood. There's a big budget movie. Everything's running like a well-oiled machine. Yeah. Shit happens at every level all the time because filmmaking is one of the most complicated situations and things to put together.
And everything you do is the first time it's been done in that particular configuration. Yeah, we've all done stunts and shots a bit like that, but it's never been done on that street with that amount of equipment and that.
Right.
And so it's a sort of handmade. Everything's handmade each time. And it's difficult. It goes wrong.
So let me ask you, you've directed so many amazing action movies and action sequences throughout your career. What makes a good action sequence? Like when you're conceiving the construction of an action sequence, what are some key things that you constantly are looking for when you're building it?
Well, yeah, I get asked that a lot by, young filmmakers coming up who want to know, because they watch a lot of action films and it's hard to discern what is better about some than others in some ways, or is it the bigger explosion, is it the more hits in the fight? But to me, I always tell them that basically with an action sequence, you've got to tell a story that works within itself. So you have a whole film that you're telling your story, your beginning, your middle, and your end, but you should do that with every action sequence as well. And make sure the audience understands what's supposed to happen in the action sequence, because I think sometimes people think just like if we shake the camera a lot, if we have a lot of chaos and it just goes on and it's really loud, then that will be satisfying. And that to me is not a satisfying action sequence. You want to have a lot of cause and effect, because you've got to understand your hero needs to get from here to there, and these are the obstacles in the way. And this is the first obstacle that hits him. Have you shot this in a way that the audience understands what that obstacle is? And then he is clever or physically, has enough prowess to get past that obstacle. But there's another one coming, and do you have 3? You have 5, depending, what kind of sequence it is. But to me, the cleverer, the cleverer those obstacles and the cleverer the way that he overcomes them, the more satisfying it is. But you've got to understand it. That's the thing. The audience has to understand, he was victorious in that moment. But he's not going to be in this because I can see why this is difficult. And, I think one of the good ones, I would say for students to watch is Terminator 2. There's some great constructed, because, James Cameron is like me, is a bit nerdy on the technical stuff and likes how the physics works of an action sequence and how the practical side, like what would happen if a truck flipped on its side like this? How far would it slide? If it slid and then it one end of it hit something, how would it spin? And how would, what's a cool way to get out of the way of that thing spinning? And so you can use, if you're a bit nerdy about physics, action sequences are great because they're all about cause and effect. And you have the sort of emotional journey of how does a hero overcome it? But you can also have for me, it's more like, the mechanics as well as the MacGyver of it. It's like set up a problem. How do you fix it? But I think, if you watch something like, the sequences in Terminator 2, that's a really good lesson. And you understand every single thing that happens in it. Nothing's too, obscure or too fast or you don't understand what happened, or it happens for no reason, just like there's something arbitrarily explodes for no reason. There's something only explodes if it explains how that thing,
Right.
fired into it, and why did it catch fire? And then when it caught fire, what did it then do? So to me, if you took out an action sequence out of an action film, you should be able to understand everything that goes on in it. And it could play as a short film. You should be able to take the action sequence out and go, oh, here's my 2-minute short film. And, what do you think of the story? And you should understand it.
Now, you also worked on another film called Expendables 2, which, man, when I heard you were on board for the sequel, I was like, this makes sense. This makes sense, because I know Sly did the first one, and I mean, Sylvester Stallone's a legend, and as a writer, as a director, I mean, he's a walking legend. How was it? This is the thought that went through my head when I heard you were on it. I'm like, okay, this makes sense. They need someone like Simon to deal with the testosterone that's on that set. I mean, you're talking about Van Damme and Lundgren and Schwarzenegger and Willis and Statham and all these guys. How did you approach directing that kind of? I mean, some of those guys are absolutely legends, and some of them are just really big action heroes. How did you approach? Because it just seems like so massive an undertaking, just dealing with that, and then also trying to tell a good story, and also trying to one up the action of the first one, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the first thing was sort of, getting past the Sly of it all, because, I met Sly, and had lunch with him, and I said, look, are you okay with me taking over this? Because obviously, what you're doing,
Right.
But I think the first one nearly killed him. So, when you're,
that's what he said.
If you're writing it, directing it, starring in it, and, it's just a lot to do. And, and he's throwing himself at it full. I think he just didn't want to go through that again. And he said, no, it's your film. You do what you want. And so he said, I'm just an actor on this. And so, and I said, look, I don't want to screw up your franchise. I don't want to, you set it up the first one and I come in and, put it, in the trash can. So, it's probably more pressure than, a normal studio hire, because, the guy that started it is on set every day. But he was really supportive, and he would come on set and go, wow, this is great. This is the best set. This is better than the first one. This is great. And I think he was so relieved not to have to solve all the problems and not have to, do the hours. And he enjoyed being an actor on it, and so he gave a very relaxed, sort of funny performance because he was enjoying it. And I think, in terms of all the others, there's definitely a pyramid on set with Sly at the top of it. So, I used that sort of the Sly, power to, so it was never a problem, because if Sly was happy, everyone was happy, because, they all look up to him. He is the godfather, of that world. And so he gets a lot of respect for them. And so they were as good as gold. They were like very well behaved. And because Sly will slap him around.
Yeah,
he never had to, but the inference was there that if anybody stepped out of line, they were going to get the Sly slap. But and then you're going to have Rambo, screaming in your face, and all these other characters.
And Rocky,
yeah. Do you want Rocky and Rambo shouting at you in your face? So no, they were good, and also they were like a lot of like music bands that bands that were big in the 80s and 90s who are coming back touring now. They're happy to be back because they probably didn't enjoy it as much as they should have the first time around, because they're so busy trying to be successful and trying to deal with a new, what's it like being a movie star and all that stuff, that they get a second chance to come back and they're going to really enjoy it and appreciate it because they went through all that once. But the fact to be able to do it again, not many people get to do that in their, later years. The thing that was they did in their youth that was their, defined them. So I think, they were having, a really good time just to be doing it again. And so it was, it was fun for them.
So you never had an issue, because I mean, I've heard of other directors who work on sets with directors who they're directing, and just as alone, let alone the person who created everything around it, and also a legend, and also all this other stuff. So it sounds like you never had any. Sly was just like, I don't want to deal with it. I just want to do what I do, and you have fun, and as long as I'm
good, and hopefully it was I was doing a good job, and that was mainly what hopefully it was he was why he was kind and respectful was because he could see that it was going well. I mean, I think if I'd been like screwing it up, I would have heard about it very quickly. But and also I have found I've directed a few directors and producers in the past, and I found actually they're actually very easy because they know the pain you're going through.
They're empathetic.
They go like, I'm not going to give this guy a hard time because I know what it's like when an actor gives you a hard time. And I know he's got 50 other things on his brain this morning, and he's got, budget problems, and he hasn't slept for 2 months. And so I found people that have been behind the camera actually treat you much better than people who have no idea. And I've done it the same myself when I've gone in front of the camera for like little cameos or something. For other people's films or mine, and I've looked at the camera and I've looked at the lights, and I go, oh my God, how do these actors do it? This is really hard, and you get suddenly you cut them a lot more slack because you realize how confusing it is to be on the other side of the camera staring at 200 people and lights, and and you have no idea who's standing behind you or next to you, or it's very confusing. So I think it goes both ways. But I actually, I directed in General's Daughter. I directed John Frankenheimer, and who was a hero of mine. And it was by sheer chance that when I was shooting that film on the Paramount lot, we were doing a night. We built a giant tank. The Paramount lot, their whole parking lot is a tank. So what they do is they tell everyone to not park there anymore, and they have a sky drop behind it, and you can actually flood the whole parking lot. And we were a night shoot, so we built a giant tent over the parking lot and put our savannah set in this swamp that we built in there. And John Travolta's in there having a big fight, and doing water work. And because there was everybody that visited the Paramount lot for a couple of weeks, they see this giant black tent where they used to park. So all they would do, they'd come up to the tent and they'd poke their heads through to see what was going on. So every day there would be different people poking, and, like Robert De Niro's head pokes through, then, I don't know, like all the, famous actors, producers, everybody wants to know what the hell's going on in this black tent. So I wish I'd taken a camera, set up a time lapse of everybody's head coming through this hole. And anyway, one day it was John Frankenheimer, and he knew Mace Neufeld, the producer, so he came in and had a chat. And I was looking at him, and I needed this one part that was a senior general in the army, but it was only one scene. It was only a 1.5 page scene, but the guy had to appear very important and a lot of weight, and it's the sort of thing you do want to call in a favor. If you're pals with Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, you go like, can you come and do me a favor and do one scene because I need your gravitas. And but I was looking at John Frankenheimer, and he's statuesque guy. He was like 6'5" or something, and he was very authoritative. And he's one of those old school Hollywood directors who's a huge shouter and a big, guy. And he's done all these amazing films. And I thought, well, I wonder if he would do it. And so I asked him, and he said, yeah, he'd do it. I'd do it. He hasn't really done any acting or much acting, I don't think, but he agreed to do it. And he came on set, and he got in the uniform and, had the hair and makeup done. He said, how do you want to shoot this 1.5 page of dialogue, this long speech? And I said, I really want to just do it all in one shot. So no cut. And he said, what? No cutting? Oh my God, I've got to learn the whole thing. I said, yeah, if you don't mind, I don't really want to go cut. It's really important to be like one shot. And so he said, oh my God, I've got to go and learn this. And I said to him, I said, look, I hope you're okay with me directing you, because, this is only my second film. Yeah. And you've, were winning Oscars before I was born. And, so, and he said, no, this is great. It's your film, And again, on the set, as I was directing him in the scene, I said, look, I hope you don't mind me saying, but could you just, move over here and do this? He said, yes, no problem. And he said, gosh, it's really weird. He said, all I want to do is please you. I've never been in that position before, because he's a huge director that everybody, wants to please him, and he'd never been in the position where he wanted to please someone else. So it was very sweet, and then great performance as well. Great.
That's remarkable. Is there anything that you wish someone would have told you at the beginning of your career that could have helped you? That one little bit of information, you're like, oh man, I wish I would have known this.
But there's no secret, magically. I think it's like with all, exciting worlds, whether you're, a rock star or a secret agent or, making movies or something. I think it's to try and appreciate it at the time, because all those incredible things you do, you're so busy stressing at the time and trying to do it. Sometimes it's hard to step back and go, wow, what we're doing is really cool here. And so I think it's to try and enjoy it along the way, because you're so busy being hard on yourself. And I don't know, maybe that's not possible. Maybe everything would turn out terrible if you did relax and try and enjoy it. But that's what I would have told myself is, look, it's probably going to be okay. So why not relax a bit and enjoy it rather than, beating yourself up that you've got to work harder and harder and but I haven't, you can't do the experiment the other way and go back and say, like, if you did just kick back a bit and enjoy it, would everything have turned out the same way? I don't know.
Well, you were saying that with, like Schwarzenegger and Willis and all these kind of Chuck Norris and all these kind of guys that came back on Expendables 2, where they probably had a ball because they were probably not stressed. I'm like, I'm not the star of this. Sly's dealing with that. I'm just here to have a good time and shoot some things, say some cool lines, and hang out with my friends. Smoke some cigars.
Yeah, and I have to say I enjoy directing much more now than I did when I started because I do. You have less to prove, I suppose, as you go on.
Right.
And also, it's like you've been through all those sticky situations, and you usually get out of it somehow. And so you get a lot more confidence with age and experience. And so I definitely enjoy it now. Rather, before it was like a task that had to be achieved and to win the fight and get it done. Now I can actually enjoy the process. And, so it comes with experience and doing it, for a while, I suppose.
Well, I mean, you've got more than 50,000 hours now, I think. At this point.
And the trick is not to fall out of love with it. I do know some people that, have fallen out of love with it and are really miserable, and are miserable to be around on a set because they don't like it anymore. But they're sort of wedded to it. But I think if you don't like it anymore, you should definitely stop doing it. But because you're making everybody's life misery. But I definitely like it more I do it. So it's, and I've been,
it shows
many years.
And it shows in your work that the movies that you've stayed consistent since Con Air. I mean, you've been working you pop out, your output is pretty good. It's not like you do one movie. You're not a Kubrick. You don't do one movie every 8 or 9 years. I mean, you're constantly working, whether in television or in this, you're always working. So you can tell that you love what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, that would be really frustrating. I mean, I'm a huge Kubrick fan and love it. But it would be really frustrating for me to know that I was only going to do a film once every 5, 6, 7, 8 years. That would be, heartbreaking because there's only so many films you can make in a lifetime. And, sometimes obviously, some are better than others because of whatever reason, but you learn something on every one. And, I think making any film is better than staying at home.
You're absolutely right. Yeah. Now, I'm going to ask you a few questions I ask all of my guests, Simon. What advice would you give a filmmaker trying to break into the business today?
Don't turn any opportunity down. Don't be too like, I have to make this kind of film. I have to, because as I said, I went through all these different types of filmmaking from, current affairs to documentaries to drama to, everything, music videos, commercials. And I would say just try and shoot as much as you can on anything, whether it's on your iPhone or, with friends and any opportunity. A friend says, oh, I want to be an actor but I need someone to shoot me doing something. Go and do it. Don't go, well, he's not very good. Or, I haven't got time or I'd rather do this. Any opportunity, do it. Because any connection you make with someone else who's also in that world can leapfrog to another connection. And everything you shoot, gives you a little bit more experience and a little bit more like, oh, I know, like I really want to do sci-fi. All I want to do is sci-fi. I'm going to shoot sci-fi. And then someone says, can you come and shoot this little comedy short film for me? And you shoot the comedy, you go, actually, I really enjoyed that comedy. Maybe I'll do some comedy, So I would just say, shoot as much and as often as you can, and don't be too precious. Don't sit around for the perfect situation. And work on films in any way you can. I mean, I worked in props and art department and sound and camera assistant on other people's films for a day here, a day there. And it's kind of fun. You get to learn other people's jobs. You meet other people and work for free. So they'll have you, so they'll have you back, or, there's a reason to hire you. It's because you're free, and just work as much as you can and take every opportunity to shoot anything you can.
What is the lesson what did you learn from your biggest failure?
I guess what I learned is no failure is total. You know what I mean? Is that every disappointment or failure, if you want to call it a failure, can be corrected to a certain extent in some way. I mean, that's the beautiful thing about filmmaking, like a sequence. One angle doesn't work, you cut to another angle. An actor isn't great, in a performance, you can make the performance better through editing. If there's always a way. So I don't think any failure is total. And also, there's that whole theory that, you don't learn anything until you fail at something, and so you shouldn't look at any kind of failure as a failure. It's more like a learning experience. But also, I don't know, it's lucky or whatever, but I never treat any failure as a total failure. It's always can be, dragged back to be a 10% failure, rather than 100% failure, because you can do something to fix most things, situations.
Now, what is the lesson that took you the longest to learn, whether in the film industry or in life?
I think it's pacing myself. It's like not rushing. The hardest thing in filmmaking, and people don't realize, it's time management, because you can make a fantastic film with unlimited time, and it's time. It's not even resources. I mean, if you've got a camera, that's basically what you need, and a way of recording the sound. But if you had unlimited time, you could make the world's greatest film if you've got the talent. But, every film you're on is a time pressure. It's like you're constantly doing a deal with yourself. If I take longer on this scene, I got to take time off that scene. If I rush this scene, it's not going to be make sense for the story. So I got to allocate my time. And every minute of a film, a professional film, is accounted for. You're supposed to do a certain amount of work per day, per hour, and you have to stick to that plan and that schedule. And that's very hard in an artistic endeavor, to be so dictated to by time management. And that's the hardest thing, is to go, okay, the discipline of saying, I've got it as good as enough, because I've got to get on and get all these other things, when really, it's very rare that a director's in the position where he just can keep going and keep going and keep going until he's absolutely satisfied, because that's not a real world situation. And that's hard. But I mean, the opposite is like, don't be panicking about time or something. So I think I've learned now is not to rush and take your time, because you can make a bad decision if you rush. If you just take a couple more beats, you can make a better decision. And but it's that balance of don't rush, but you still got to hit those time deadlines.
So you've never heard the term, you never heard the sentence ever uttered to you, Simon. All you have is time and money. Have fun.
That would be nice. Yeah, that would be lovely. Yeah. I mean, yeah, but I do have questions, like that. A producer would, when they're scheduling, whether they say, well, how long will it take you to shoot this scene? And I go, well, how long will you give me? Because I could shoot it in 2 minutes, the length of the dialogue, or I could spend 2 weeks shooting the most incredible version of this scene with, every conceivable angle and like beautiful lighting and waiting for the sun to be in the right spot. And I mean, how much will you give me? I just need as much time as you're willing to give me,
And I'll make it work with what you got to a certain extent. Exactly. Yeah. And last question, 3 of your favorite films of all time.
Ooh, well, I mean, there's so many. I hate that question because it's three is hard to pin down. But I mean, I do love, you know, films that I grew up with and films at different times of my life. So, you know, sort of in my sort of teens, there's a film called Withnail and I, with Richard E. Grant and Paul McGann. It's a small comedy about two struggling actors in England. And not many people in America know it because when I do mention it, people go, "Oh no, I haven't seen that." But in the UK, it's a kind of a cult. You know, okay. I've been on sets in UK, and the camera crew will recite lines from the film to you because it's a cult film. But yeah, so I try and encourage all Americans to see this film because it seems to be very well known in England, but not in the States. But it's called Withnail and I. And then films, you know, I said different stages of my life, and these are not necessarily, you know, great classics. I mean, I love all the big classics, you know, the David Lean movies and everything like that. But that, you know, everybody does. But films that meant a lot to me, you know, at different parts of my life were things like, you know, when I was very young, would be Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Yeah. You know, like the fantasy of that to me is you know,
magical.
The 6 or 7, you know, old with me of that would thought that was the most magical thing ever. And that was the sort of thing would get me into filmmaking is the fantasy. Because to me, filmmaking is taking you to another world. And I, you know, because I have to confess, I don't make very realistic films. You know, they are not, you know, they are quite fantasy and larger than life and operatic because I kind of want to be taken to another place. I don't necessarily, I mean, I watch other people's very, you know, great realistic films and love them. But my world is a bit more ridiculous in a way, but you know, and so then you know, and then that was, you know, my 5 or 6 year old me getting into film, and then the 12, 13-year-old me was a film called Squawk Melody, another English film that was written by Alan Parker and directed by Waris Hussein, and produced by David Putnam, and it's a small film set in a school in London, in a kind of a rough part of London, and it's all sort of actors that were 11 and 12, and it was just my life, you know. So it's the first time I went to the movies and didn't see James Bond, you know, jumping off a cliff, or you know, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs doing something. You know, this was my life. It was kids at school, but very realistically shot, and they're getting up to all sorts of mischief, and they're really, you know, rude to adults, and they're kind of like, but it's very sweet. And so this is the sweetest soundtrack by the Bee Gees, which is not the strongest point, but
hey, the Bee Gees are, listen, the Bee Gees
they're great,
legendary.
Yeah, they're great on, you know, Saturday Night Fever and all that stuff. Yes, but not in this one. But but the rest of the film is great. So I'd have to say, like, 3 films. They're not, you know, as I said, the big epics, but they meant something to me at different ages of my life, you know, and. So that's why they're important to me. So when I say favorite, and I'm going to go now, I'm going to watch them again now because.
I mean, as you were talking, I'm like, what was the film like when I was coming up, like in 8, 9, 10 years old? And the obvious ones, Star Wars, E.T., all those kind of things. Mm-hmm. But there's something like Never Ending Story by Wolfgang. You look at that and you're like, at that moment, you know, that was a very powerful movie. You know, to me, and those kind of things. It's, you know, I've heard the greatest, you know, some people are like, oh, I loved Under the Dragon. And I'm like, I loved Under the Dragon too. But is that on your top 3? It's like, it is. It meant a lot to me when I saw it when I was 12. Things like that. So it doesn't all have to be Godfather.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've watched Godfather, you know, I don't know how many thousands. I got it on every format ever made, you know, and I still watch it on TV with the commercials when it comes on, you know.
Because we're ridiculous. Why do we do that when we could literally just get up, grab our Blu-ray, plug it in? And that's happened to me multiple times. And I'm like, why am I just too lazy to get up.
But it's such a good film, you don't want to waste that 30 seconds of it. So those epics are fantastic. But I think a film that means something to you, and also that probably led, you know, people like you and me into the business, you know, means even more because it's, you know, it's what we ended up doing. So,
Simon, it has been an absolute pleasure and honor talking to you, my friend. I know I can talk to you for at least another 5 or 6 hours, but I appreciate your time, and thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your knowledge and your experiences with the tribe today. And continued success, my friend. I can't wait to see your next one. So, thank you so much, my friend.
You're welcome. Lovely to talk to you. All right.